Hello guys, once again it's Matt, and today we have another video. Let's thank our members first, Invictus, Crazy Bugging Cots, and our Patreons, Interceptor, 35, Richardson, Danny Cage, and Rupert. And let's get into it. So today we're going to take a look on the F-15, the F-16, and the MiG-29. I wanted to show to you guys a little bit on my opinion on these kind of aircraft, you know. So, as I said in another video, the F-16 is just the logical option for the counter to the MiG-29, as you know, mainly because it is an aircraft that you can add for multiple nations. So at least with the MiG-29 in one patch, imagine if the F-16 and the MiG-29 came in the same patch, at least 6 nations plus the French would have an F-16 or a MiG-29 or a Mirage 2000, so a 4th generation aircraft, you know. The Swedish would still have the Viggen that can receive better missiles, which is the only aircraft that can be added right now for the Swedish if they don't add another sub-3s or something like that. So it just becomes a thing of, it would be filling the holes that needs to be filled, you know, in the 4th generation kind of part of the game. But I still think that the F-15A from the late 70s and the F-15C from the early 80s, obviously I'm not talking about the 90s aircraft that we see in DCS, for example, with MRAMs and the better APG-70, I think it's the radar that they used on that time and stuff like that. We're talking about APG-63, we're talking about AIM-7Fs and then AIM-7Ms later. So we're not talking about late 80s, early 90s, okay? Even because, yeah, you have better F-15s, yeah, so the MiGs are better and the Sukhois are better and everybody has better aircraft in the 90s, okay? The point is early 80s, late 70s, which is the time that we are kind of in War Thunder, and we are kind of going to see in War Thunder for these upcoming 4th generation aircraft. But the idea here is that, first of all, as I said, I agree that the F-16 should come as the counter to the MiG-29. But I still think that in some areas, the F-16 is worse than the MiG-29. Why? Because the MiG-29 and the Su-27, they are built with a different concept in mind of super maneuverability and as a fighter mainly, you know. The F-15 also has this in mind to some extent, you know, because later obviously they changed to be able to carry bombs and other stuff, and the MiG-29 is also, and the Su-27 is also. But these aircraft, they became known to be a fighter. It's different from an F-18, for example, that the main role of it was to be everything, you know. Since the beginning, it was a fighter and an attacker. And the F-16 also has kind of that idea, you know. Not really, you know, initially it's just a light fighter program, you know. But the idea was just behind an F-5 that can do a little bit more. That was the idea. So in the late 70s and early 80s, especially because it is kind of the time frame that we are, the F-15 was the main oppositor to the MiG-29 and the main oppositor to the Su-27 later, you know. The F-16, even though, yes, it could be very, very powerful and it would turn a lot, and yeah, it has many, you know, it was a very, very good aircraft. It had problems with BVR, it had problems in the sense of the radar, you know. MiG-29 itself compared the APG-66 to the radar on the MiG-29. I think it's that time was the N019, I think? I don't remember. But anyway, I think it's the RP-29. I don't remember the name designation, but still, it is a radar that it was about 40% stronger than the radar on the F-16. So you can imagine the radar that we have in the Kai, for example, that detects people from what, 60 kilometers, something like that. Imagine having 40% more range than that. That's the MiG-29. And the F-15 is around 10 to 20 kilometers in range better than the MiG-29. Very similar to the Su-27. So the idea here is that you would have obviously a worse radar than the F-15. You would have less missiles than the F-15, but not by much, you know. It's not something like, I mean, the MiG-23s already have less missiles than the Phantoms and the F-14s and stuff. the Mirage as well. So that's not really a problem, you know. It's a pain, but it's not really a problem, right? And the radar would be 10 to 20 kilometer less effective against 3 meter squared targets, which means it's comparable, you know. The MiG on the radar on the F-15 on that time, it was very similar to the radar on the MiG-29. It is like comparing the... It's a little bit more the difference between the MiG-29 and the F-16. That's my point, you know. And with that, we can see that the F-15 would much rather be a very good option to fight the MiG-29 than the F-16. Obviously, we face a problem of, you know, the F-15 can be only added for 2 nations, which is Japan and the US, which is always a problem, you know. So as I said, I still think that the F-16 should come first. But if they are going to add the F-16, we really need a better version than the early blocks. The blocks from the same time as the MiG-29. Because we need the ADF, we need stuff like that. That will be able to carry Sparrows, the Sparrow F, the Sparrow M, M9Ls, M9Ms, you know. And not just a glorified F5, you know, as the early blocks were. I still think that they can come as an event vehicle or something like that. But to be comparable to a MiG-29, it needs to be a more advanced version of these F-16As, or at least an early version of the C variant, maybe, to be comparable to these early MiG-29s as well. It's not... A lot of people get mad. I mean, there's a lot of biases here and there, and people just don't understand that. They think they are neutral. I hate this, but people think they are neutral when they are talking about aircraft or anything, in politics even. They think they are neutral. They're talking about their opinion, and no, I'm being neutral. No, you're not. Everybody has a bias about everything. There's no such thing as a neutrality, okay? It doesn't exist. Just doesn't. Even if you are trying to be neutral, you will be going towards your bias. The thing is, a lot of people don't admit that. So I just think that a lot of people need to admit that. So I start admitting that, right? I always say that I am biased towards Soviet stuff, and I always consider Soviet stuff one of the pinnacles of the technology in the Cold War. But it doesn't mean that the US has bad stuff. It just means that I like, that's the word, I like more the Soviet stuff. I like the doctrine. I like the way that they thought about stuff. It was much more simpler, cheaper, easy to produce, massively producing a lot of these aircraft that were very, very potent, you know. And the US has a different doctrine than that. So, yeah, everybody has a bias, and people need to admit that. If you are from the US, most likely you are biased towards the US. If you are Russian, most likely you are biased towards Soviet stuff. But even me, I'm Brazilian, and I mean, I'm in the Western society, quote unquote, and I still think that the Eastern aircraft are much more fun than the Western ones. And that's just an opinion, you know? It's a like kind of thing. I still will admit that, for example, the F-14 is something that the Russians had no counter to it. But the same way, I'm going to say that the Americans didn't have any counters to the MiG-25, especially in the early 70s. So, yeah, that's the thing. We need to try to stay neutral, especially me that I'm creating content, right? But a lot of people need to think about this as well. Not just me, you know, because it's not fair, right? But still, continuing with the subject of the video, I just think that, as I said, the F-16 has its problems. It would be a more fun aircraft to add, just because it is lighter and it is a more all-around doing everything aircraft, you know? It will do air-to-ground, it will do everything. If they add the ADF or some version that is upgraded, it will have at least 2 Sparrows, which becomes a lot more comparable if you think that comparing to the MiG-29, because MiG-29 at earlier than 1988, for example, it would just use 2 R-27s and then 4 IR missiles. Same way as the F-16 would be doing, you know, it would use just 2 Sparrows and then 4 IR missiles as well. So it is very much comparable, but you have to think that, yes, the MiG-29 will be worse in the air-to-ground role, but in the BVR, the MiG-29, depending on the version that the F-16 is coming, The MiG-29 will outrange the radar on the F-16. It will be a better radar, more sensitive, with less blind speeds. The blind speeds on the MiG-29 reach 200 kilometers per hour, man. That's a really, really low blind speed. That's like less than half of the F-14, if I'm not mistaken. But it is hard to find information confirming that. But yeah, it is a very good radar. Together with R-27s, even if the AIM-7M comes, the R-27 is amazing as well. So yeah, I just think that for the US sake, after the MiG-29 is added, probably the next aircraft they have to think about adding is the F-15. I don't think they should, because the Americans already have the F-14 right now, and they will have the F-16 then. So we need to add first these two aircraft. I think it's a good basis to build from, you know. So put the MiG-29 and then the F-16. But just remember what I'm saying right now. In the future, you will remember this. The MiG-29 will be better than the F-16. At least these earlier versions. Maybe not the later versions. That's why I say we need an ADF or something like that. That will make it have a bit of a better radar and stuff like that. On the dogfight, I think it's very comparable, even though the MiG-29 can have the HMS and can have very high AOAs of 30 degrees in the dogfight. But still, the fly-by-wire systems and stuff like that of the F-16, they're pretty amazing as well. So I think in a dogfight, it always comes down to the pilot. But for the BVR, the MiG-29 will come out on top. That's why I think the F-15 is a more comparable counter to the MiG-29 and to the Su-27 than the F-16 will ever be. But still saying that, the F-16 is a more complete aircraft to come. It's an aircraft that deserves more to be in-game just because of the amount of nations they can get. It will be more balanced if we have a lot of F-15s, F-16s and the same patch than only having another 4th generation aircraft for the US and for Japan as the F-15, you know? So I think the F-15 should come, but not right now. It is the more viable option as the counter to the MiG-29 and especially for the Su-27. But I just think that it's not the time yet. We need the F-16 first, then we think about that. Same way it goes for the MiG-29. MiG-29 and the Su-27, they're both conceived as basically an integrated piece of VVS, you know, a piece of the Air Force of the Soviet Union. They are supposed to be working together, with the MiG-29 being a point defense fighter and a much shorter range, obviously, but in many airfields and having a large number of aircraft. And the Su-27 being able to actually invade the enemy's territory and do whatever he wants, escorting, bombing, and stuff like that. It's a more complete aircraft, a bigger aircraft for more longer range missions. MiG-29, shorter ranges to be fast and attack anybody that is coming into your territory. Same principle that we had with the Su-15 kinda and the MiG-21 in the 60s. Same principle that we had with the MiG-23 and the MiG-25 in the 70s. And even the MiG-21s, you know. So yeah, there is that. Okay? Let me know in the comments if you think what you think about this. Be aware of these type of biases, and I see you guys on the next one, okay? Bye guys, subscribe. See you.